Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining. I'm just going to wait another couple minutes, make sure everybody has time to log in and all that stuff. In the meantime, if you want to put your phone on mute, that would be appreciated. Thank you very much. Great. Sounds like a lot of people are coming in, so we'll just give it 2 more minutes, and then we'll get the ball rolling. I'm just checking that Dan's on the line and that he signed in okay. He's the other presenter, so just making sure.
Yes, I'm here.
Perfect. Thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you.
Just to keep everybody on time, I wanted to welcome you all to Parachute Presents. It's a mini-series we're running here at Parachute, just to keep people engaged, talk about some different injury prevention areas. I want to thank you all for coming. We're all busy. It looks like we have some great attendance. We're up to 30 people now, which is nice. The session is being recorded, so, if you really want to listen to it again, you have that option, or you can forward it to some colleagues if you find it interesting. Everybody could just put their phones on mute. That would be great. We have a lot of people on the line, so just to make sure there's no kind of background noise, that we have the best recording possible. So as I said, just a bit of a goal for the day. Parachute is running these Parachute Presents series to bring our networks together to discuss various injury topics. It's a fantastic opportunity to kind of take a step back, look at some of the different work that's going on here, and see, if there's any questions in our network. So 4 questions. You can either email me at watson@parachutecanada.org, or there's a text box there should be for the Join Me, and you can just send us a message. We're going to do all the questions at the end of both presentations, so right at the end of this hour, just to make sure we have enough time to go through both the presentations. We will be also sending out a survey after. It would be great if you have the time. It should only take a couple minutes. It's only 8 questions long, I believe. Just defines, what you think was important, what wasn't, what you liked, what you didn't like, and that's it. So that's all the housekeeping. Great. So my name is Scott Watson. I'm the Manager of Government Relations here at Parachute. I think most of you should know who Parachute is, but just in case you were forwarded this from, a friend of a friend, Parachute is a national charity. We're an amalgamation of 4 previous organizations who were Safe Kids, Think First, Safe Communities, and Smart Risk. We all came together about 3 years ago, realizing that we were all operating in a similar space with different focuses for sure. So Parachute is focused on 4 main areas, those being seniors, sports and recreation, motor vehicle collisions, and mental health. So in the space of sports and recreations, obviously with one of our legacy organizations being Think First, we do a lot of work in the concussion world. This is a very timely presentation. I was down at Queen's Park this morning looking at Rowan's Law here in Ontario. We'll get into more of that later. But so this will give you a bit of an overview of, kind of various angles of concussion education, and then we'll talk about alcohol policy out in Nova Scotia. So first, let's just look at a couple definitions, just as a broad overview. I know we're coming at this from a lot of different angles, but just from my role here at Parachute, obviously it starts with advocacy. So,
like more than a cursory white.
In assessing the relationship between the media and policy, first we have to look at the role of advocacy, a tool anyone can use, deliberately or strategically use of evidence and information, the media, experts, humans, and all other resources to shape injury prevention in the policy landscape. Obviously, the mind jumps straight to lobbying in government, but it can be for anything. Advocating for your cause in the realm with the right time, with the right people. So advocacy is then the use of information to develop or influence legislation. the use of the media to educate and inform policy, and this will be a theme throughout the presentation, the education and informing policy as opposed to, lobbying for change. And, how awareness drives change, using the media as a tool, platform to influence policy is also a role of advocacy. And then an important sub-part of advocacy is government relations. And as we look at the media and policy, it's important to discuss it just most generally. So GR can be defined very boringly, I guess, as becoming acquainted with government officials so that you can help them conduct their business, formulating and executing public policy. So this is a large part of what I do here at Parachute. I work with government officials to educate and inform their decisions. It's dealing and communicating with legislatures and governments and agencies on behalf of the organization. We'll talk a lot about windows of opportunity later, so things like elections, pre-budget submission, bills, committee work. And then it's the application of one or more communication techniques by individuals or institutions to affect decisions of government. All right, so hopefully everybody's got their phones on mute, and if you still have problems, just let me know. So we were talking about government relations, the education and informing people about strategic decisions. So we'll bring back in the role of the media, and it can mean multiple things when it comes to government relations. Obviously, the reporting on public policy decisions or indecisions. Integrating public policy with the media is also a big part of it. So whether that be any form of things, a quote from the minister, dissemination, social media, or anything. So quickly moving on to the L words, finally, in the GR public policy side, we can look at lobbying. And obviously this is the government relations, the advocacy that includes decision-making by legislators or officials in the government by individuals, other legislators, constituents, or advocacy groups. In the Parachute example, obviously we're a national charity, so we can only lobby about 10% of our time, and that's dictated by Canada Revenue Agency. We can certainly educate and inform and provide input rather than advocate for change, including the use of the media. So a great example of our education and awareness is a recent editorial in the Ottawa Sun written by Louise Logan, President and CEO of Parachute, Dr. Charles Tatter, one of our founders, and Rowan Stringer's parents. So this was not considered lobbying, absolutely. It was merely just educating and informing about an important policy opportunity. Things we have to stray away from as a charity, but if you're a not-for-profit out there or if you're a corporation, might be useful for you. Petitions, write your MP, rallies, that kind of stuff. Here at Parachute, we use the media to work to get our message out through multiple avenues, to change the policy cycle, which we'll get into soon, and then drive policy. It's important to recognize the difference between advocacy, GR, and lobbying, and that's kind of a quick overview of that. While we're talking about government relations, I pulled this slide from a public policy presentation that we give. We have to take a look at the development of government overall. Without getting too technical, obviously there's multiple jurisdictions in Canada. The division of powers comes from Section 191 and 92 of the Constitution Act, which is, I'm sure you all read every night. Pretty much assigns the federal jurisdiction their power and says everything else would be left to the provinces. So over time, because of the way it was written, there's been a huge shift towards the provinces, especially with the growth of provincial jurisdictions such as health, education, and transport. And looking at the decision-making process, so here's where our democratic elections, our parliamentary system, our two chambers, the Prime Minister, the Queen, party loyalties. This is the matter which we review our bills, and our bills become laws and are implemented. So if we look at the bottom right section, we have the policy cycle. This is a very kind of common wheel that we've seen a million times. It starts with the agenda setting. Well, you guys can't see it. Agenda setting box in the top right, and obviously the media plays a huge role as we determine what, social needs are being met. So let's run through this with an example, right? So we're looking at motor vehicle collisions, specifically distracted driving. So we know over the last number of years there's been a huge rise in the awareness of distracted driving and, the implications it has on motor vehicle collision rates. Obviously, this has been heavily reported on in the news, and that kind of set our agenda. So we realized there was a problem. This led to a number of policies being formed, so policy formulation moving into the bottom right circle. The negotiations is pretty much what you can get through your given jurisdiction at any given time. So the introduction of a bill, let's keep the example going of distracted driving. So here in Ontario, it was Bill 31. It was a distracted driving law. It increased the fine significantly, but it also had a number of other things attached to it as well. The public policy, it was passed, so it was implemented. And this is where your enforcement comes in. Obviously the cops are out there, enforcing the new laws, handing out the new fines, and then during that process, the review happens almost organically, and this is relayed through the media as it sets the next form of agenda setting. So whether or not that bill is not enough or too much, and then we begin the policy cycle all over again. So I just wanted to, you can relate the amount of people involved in the policy process to the, to the policy cycle. So at the agenda setting stage, we're talking about 35 million Canadians, the general policy, the public policy stuff. But by the time you get to the decision-making process, you could be down to cabinet, 31 people, or just the Prime Minister of one person. And then as it's implemented, we go back up to 35 million people, depending obviously on what bill it is, and the cycle goes around and around. So just to make sure we're on the same page, a piece of legislation is a directive placed by government to modify in some way the legal rights or entities within a corresponding jurisdiction. So the Ontario Highway Traffic Act used to be a bill and is now a law, and is a piece of legislation. Legislation is supported by requirements that are regulations, just so that we're all on the same page. So moving on. Oh, there we go. Too far. So in appealing to government, obviously you want to, align with the government's messaging of the day. Messaging is key, and the media is definitely a huge part of that as well. There's various methods you can use to approaching government. Here's a couple just to consider. Obviously, knowing the priorities and the platform of each government is huge. The new Liberal government, for example, is focused on the middle class, the economy, interjurisdictional collaboration, partnerships in general. The introduction of mandate letters over the last couple of years as the seemingly new norm has been a fantastic way to see how priorities are set for new governments. What started as kind of a provincial trend is now national, which is great. And you as an organization can help them deliver on their mandates, and you'll both be successful. So this really just makes it relevant to them. A great example was a couple of years ago, leading up to the federal budget. There was a mandatory online form that had to be filled out with certain priorities being filled. So the priorities were the demographic shift, the economy, infrastructure in general, and a couple others. So for injury prevention specifically, it's a little challenging to fit into those categories, but it's definitely doable, right? So seniors falls, so we need to invest in injury prevention before the demographic shift. Prevention of injuries cost the Canadian economy billions, so the focus on the economy. And for the infrastructure, it was a little tricky. I mean, they were going for bridges and road projects, but we were looking at a healthy workforce that is truly the infrastructure of Canada. Obviously, so the investment in injury prevention would mitigate costs and provide a strong infrastructure. Just realizing that the government's in the macro game, everyone will have winners and losers, but you just have to acknowledge and recommend solutions. And then the role of the media in bringing, the topic du jour back is obviously to compel your story, to use it as a tool as you appeal to government overall. There's a lot of strategies that are in place. I'll just, run through this. Lots of tactics, traditional and social media obviously being the big ones. Media blitz, public commentary, name and shame. It's certainly an avenue to go. You kind of got to make sure it's worthwhile. Partnerships, events are a big one. Speaking roles or announcements. However, your strategies remain universal regardless of the tactics. So you said your idea, you keep your messaging tight, so whether it's a focus on concussions rather than injury prevention in general, which could mean anything, and then you implement and you evaluate and you reevaluate. So if you can't track it, you can't show an improvement and your message gets diluted, media will be less interested, giving you a decreased role in public policy. So everything is related and everything is local. And our example of concussions will certainly get into that. So our final kind of overview before we get into concussion is the watching for windows. And this will come back. We'll see how it's applied to concussions, but you can have all the research in the world, but your opportunity is critical. And certainly true in the case of concussions. You need that kind of passionate, persistent, and patient outreach. You need to put it in a context that's relatable, and you find a champion. So let's dive into concussions and show how those windows kind of operate. Obviously, there's been a huge rise in concussion awareness with increased media coverage for a number of reasons. Just quickly seeing where we came from. Obviously, there was this mentality not too long ago where you were to play through the pain, the warrior mentality. Concussions weren't really seen as a big issue. There's a nice picture of the old commissioner of the NFL, and this is from December of 1994, where he infers that concussions weren't really an issue, and that the media was kind of over-embellishing what it is. Just to relate it, I guess I'm an old millennial, technically. So when I was playing hockey growing up, smelling salts were a thing for sure. Fighting your own teammates in training camp was definitely a thing. Being told to take someone out of a game. I think we've come a long way with concussion awareness and injury prevention awareness in general. But there's definitely a ways to go. So what happens? Why this big change? And my answer, I guess, would be a parallel process between large cases, media awareness, and research. The three of them collaborated to eventually inform policy. So there was key research studies that were released. They provided real evidence of the impact, short and long term, of concussions. Champions from the sport were lending their credibility to the issue, and the media covered both. And one of the big breakthroughs here in Canada was Eric Lindros. And, before Sidney Crosby, he was definitely one of the biggest players in Canada. Both were first overall in the draft pick. Both were league MVPs in the early 20s. And then both of them had devastating concussions. Most fans know that Lindros wasn't quite the same after a series of blows to the head. He had at least 8 concussions before he retired in 2007. So the research and awareness through high-profile incidents led to the potential movement in concussion rates and concussion policy. So here's the parallel process that I was talking to. There was a series of large media incidents over time. The consistent application of common evidence-informed or getting better messaging led to real policy change. A couple of the big highlights over the last number of years was obviously Vienna in 2001, which was the first international consensus on concussions. Obviously the fourth being held in Zurich in 2012, and there's another one being held this year. Lindros' first major concussion was in 2001. Mike Webster from the NFL, he died in 2002. And then Sidney Crosby's concussions in 2011 in January. So just to sum it up, with new research initiatives skyrocketing levels of public awareness and the attention of all the people who matter most, there was a bit of a watershed in society's understanding of the confounding, mysterious head injury that is concussion. So it's the incidence of high-profile cases, the research that drives awareness and really creates the environment for policy change. So why all 3 elements were required is a great quote that I found. One of the most important things that has ever happened this year was media focus on this. As a researcher, I could publish on the medical journal, but I'm preparing myself to say several thousand people might read it. So just kind of reiterating the parallel process and the role of the media in increasing the awareness. Education, as it relates back to the policy development cycle, is certainly an important part of the development of policy. But why no policy change? I mean, all this research, all this awareness, education, and no public policy. Here in Canada, at least, there were some huge breakthroughs in the United States. Now all 50 states have, it's weird about the slide size. I'm not sure there's anything we could do about it now. If you can zoom in on your own computer, perhaps that'll make the slides a little bigger. Control plus or Command plus if you're on a Mac. So yeah, as I was saying, 50 pieces of legislation in the United States, one for each state, and there's been multiple attempts, certainly here in Ontario and across Canada, with multiple stakeholders advocating and lobbying for change, getting back to what we talked about earlier. Seemingly national consensus on the importance of the issue, but no action. So what was the tipping point? And I think that was Roland Stringer. In my opinion, the tipping point wasn't a professional athlete. No. It was a 17-year-old high school rugby player. So just in case you don't know too much about Rowan, she was 17 when she died in 2013, suffering from multiple impact syndrome. She definitely had that warrior mentality that we were talking about, going back into multiple games after sustaining concussions. The Office of the Chief Coroner of Ontario held hearings, and the jury produced a series of recommendations on how Rowan's death could have been avoided. The recommendations named multiple parties.
It's interesting, but I don't know how to
have a variety of recommendations, but most notably was the recommendation for a piece of legislation in Rowan's name. It has been introduced as a private member's bill by MPP Lisa MacLeod. It has passed the second reading and is anticipated to pass in the spring of 2016. The bill sets out to establish a committee to recommend on how to implement the recommendations from Rowan Stringer verdict. So it's a great first step. But just kind of proves not to overly quote Margaret Mead, but never doubt that a small group of thoughtful, committed citizens can change the world. Indeed, that's the only thing that ever has. It's not the large scale, or it, may not have been in this example, it's not the large scale concussion rates, but the story of the one that really has led to change. And I certainly think this bill is going to be passed this spring. It also proves, kind of that all politics is local. Policy change and media coverage is driven by personalized local stories. It was in this instance. So when you have that research, the media, the awareness, and the opportunity, then, we can really drive policy change. So just to wrap this up in the next couple of slides before we talk about alcohol policy, I'm trying to take a look back at some of the elements we looked at earlier. So the windows and the concept and the context were set for us. We had the NFL studies, we had the champions, and we got the coverage, and we had the personal stories. Our key messages were tight with brain injuries and concussions and the anti-warrior mentality. This led to concussion education legislation through the policy cycle as it was set by the agenda by this mass call by the population for concussion.
Yeah.
Jurisdictionally, provincial and territorial, obviously they have a big role to play in the legislation in the healthcare roles, but also federal, there's a role to play with product safety and in public health. Relationships with media and advocacy is obviously, building relationships with government as an organization. Concussions with meeting key decision makers here in Ontario. Support from all sides of the House was obviously nice, and good communications and media support when opportunities presented itself. We made it relevant. You profile the successes rather than the costs associated with any program. And not be too doom and gloom. So after 20 years of awareness and coverage, obviously there's room for the policy to grow. Obviously there's room for more awareness. But I think, Rowan's Law is definitely a great first step. And then just kind of concluding this, policy change takes time, and often you need that open window. Evidence is essential, but not sufficient given the context of policymaking. This is that relationship with media that is most critical. Persistence is required. I think of Dr. Tatter, who's been at this for decades and hasn't, seen this success, but he's definitely excited about Rowan's Law here in Ontario. Many different components. The experts, the media, the champions, the incidents lead to a tipping point that drives policy change, and just relating that back to the policy cycle as well. And then media attention makes a difference. I think, throughout the entire policy process, media is that consistent voice. It educates and informs, just like we do here at Parachute to government officials. Media does to the general public and government officials as well. And then obviously the passion and the persistence and the X factor, and finding a champion. So I just wanted to thank you very much. You should have my contact through arranging this presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to send me a note, or at the end, I hope we still have a little bit of time for some questions. Now I'm just going to quickly switch over to Dan's presentation. It's my pleasure to introduce Dan Steevs. He's on the health promotion team lead for addictions for the Addictions and Mental Health program for the Nova Scotia Health Authority. So definitely a longer title than mine, which is fantastic. And he's agreed to join us here today to talk about alcohol policy.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, I'm sitting in the Halifax Regional Municipality here, in Nova Scotia. It's a cold, blustery day with a bit of snow. Scott asked me to share with you a story of how we engaged with social media and the media to influence local alcohol policy. Alcohol evidence would indicate that the overconsumption and risky use of alcohol is a main contributor to injury, especially in those between the ages of 15 and 30. So one of the things we try to do here is influence the prevalence of injury by having influence over alcohol policy, which will reduce the amount of heavy drinking that's going on. So the next slide, I always like to do my disclosure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the alcohol industry, but I have accepted money from the alcohol industry in 1987 when I had a beautiful mullet. Pretty well have no hair now, if you could see me, but I had a wonderful mullet, and I did accept $500 from Moosehead Breweries in 1987 because my residents drank the most Moosehead beer. And shockingly, we went out and spent that $500 on more Moosehead beer. So just a little bit about where we are in Nova Scotia, and particularly Halifax. We've really made significant change to the culture of tobacco use here in the province. I can tell you that rarely would a non-tobacco user be offered a cigarette. It would be odd to be offered a cigarette. If you refuse a cigarette, you would get a health kudo. Oh, good for you, don't ever start. So the culture has shifted around tobacco. With cake, we're getting there. The culture is starting to shift. We can feel some shift. It's not where it should be, but we're starting to feel a shift. If offered cake here in Nova Scotia and you refuse it, you will get another offer very quickly. You'll be offered a rationalization. Are you sure? It's only 400 points. You can go for a walk tonight. But eventually, if you refuse the cake, eventually, if you choose the salad instead of fries, you will get a health kudo. Now, it might be sarcastically, oh, aren't you being good? Isn't he being good? Wow, you're on a real health kick. But it will be a health kudo, and eventually people will stop asking you and accept that reality. Not so for alcohol. In the province of Nova Scotia, and particularly in Halifax, the dominant culture, as identified by our Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Robert Strang, and public health units and addictions units, and many stories, both quantitative and qualitative research, when offered a drink, and if you refuse a drink, judgment comes almost immediately. People have a hard time with people who don't consume alcohol. We have very much a culture of heavy drinking. You will be offered different types of alcohol. Are you sure? We have Tahitian teehees, squash, strawberry, alley cats. Just trying to advance the slide there, Scott. There we go. You'll be offered more alcohol. So just to demonstrate that despite having a provincial alcohol strategy released in 2007, near 10 years later, we haven't had the same type of impact on consumption of alcohol as we have had with tobacco. If I refuse a drink because I work for addiction services, I often get, oh, you must be in recovery, are you religious, are you no fun, when I'm really a lot of fun. I'm not all that religious, and I'm not in recovery. If my wife refuses a drink, not so much now, but in her younger years, well, congratulations, you're pregnant. I'll skip that. I had a little video to show that demonstrated that. So this isn't so much the case anymore. The NSLC would stand for Nova Scotia Liquor Commission. It would be our provincial monopoly on the sale of alcohol. This was one of our largest malls in Dartmouth, the Micmac Mall, up until very recently, and the Toys R Us moved to another mall. So this type of sign doesn't isn't there anymore, but I thought it was a good way to tell the story. So our Chief Public Health Officer, Dr. Robert Strang, in Nova Scotia we're drinking more, we're starting to drink earlier. Heavy drinking is normal in Nova Scotia. Heavy drinking is normal for Nova Scotia children and youth. Binge drinking is high for Nova Scotia undergraduate students. And of course our vectors regarding injury would be elevated as well due to the heavy drinking culture. Just a little bit more about that, just to tell the story. Age of first drink in Nova Scotia has dropped. For boys, it's under 13. For girls, it's just around 13. This comes from the Student Drug Use Survey 2012. So that's why we really say we have a pediatric alcohol issue here in Nova Scotia. And this is different. I'm often asked, Dan, but hasn't it always been that way? And the answer is no. Data indicates that our age of first drink is dropping by generation. My particular city, Halifax, Nova Scotia, if you've never been, come on out. You can stay with me. That's no problem. Just drop me a line. We have elevated rates of heavy drinking, so 30% of men in the Halifax and surrounding area drink heavily, 16% of women drink heavily. So Halifax is a regional municipality. We were amalgamated 20 years ago. So the regional municipality of Halifax is about 400,000 people. It has the same land squared distance as the province of Prince Edward Island. We go from we're a small city. You know, I'm not trying to say Halifax is Toronto or anything like that, but for the Maritimes, it is one of the larger cities, but it's a small city in the scale. We go from a very urban core with all the issues of an urban core, and the regional municipality really reaches out to pastoral farmland as well. So it's diverse in that way. Just a bit more about DHA 9 you see on this slide. That's the Halifax catchment area, and from the Student Drug Use Survey, obviously we have again with our young people, binge drinking. Binge, of course, being 4 or more drinks per sitting for men, 5 or more drinks per sitting for females. Our universities, we're home to, here in Halifax, we're home to 4 major universities, and of course the culture of heavy drinking is alive and well on campus, certainly bearing the effects. Dalhousie Women's Drinking Team, inspiring blackouts since 1818. This was the T-shirt of a frosh week not long ago at a local university, forgetting the most memorable week of your life. And we've had 5 alcohol-related deaths in 7 years here in Maritime Universities, and 1 near miss. So we've had a death at St. X, a death at Stew, a death at Acadia, a near death at Acadia, another death at Acadia via Mexico, and just in December, tragically, we had another alcohol poisoning death at Dow. So I'm hoping somebody does something soon. That's not what this is about, but I'm just trying to illustrate where we're at here in the Maritimes. This is my daughter's elementary school. The outdoor advertising in the city is alive and well. This would all be within 3 kilometers of her elementary school. You can't get to the elementary school without passing by outdoor alcohol advertising. This is one of the things I'm going to talk about in just a moment of what we were trying to take action on, the amount of alcohol advertising in the outdoor alcohol advertising that the city could control. This is our boardwalk, our Tall Ship Festival. These were the Captain Morgan wenches. You could have your picture taken with the wenches. Their words, not mine. So if I have more pictures like this, but these were women, and this was on a large summer day, our Tall Ships Festival, with hundreds of thousands of people walking around. And there was a pirate there. You kids could get your picture with them, too. This is one of our largest shopping areas. This is our warehouse, NSLC. Again, the NSLC is the Nova Scotia Liquor Commission. And this is in one of our most populous shopping districts called Bears Lake. This would be a large bulletin board on the side of the NSLC warehouse. And again, documents indicate that long about 2010, they had a marketing plan to particularly target women and young women to increase their purchases of alcohol. Again, just another example of outdoor advertising. We see here all natural flavors, inviting people to try something new with coconut water and, maybe populate it with adult drink. Finally, this is alcohol advertising in what we would call our sports center. It's called the Metro Center, so it would be our large hockey rink where our junior hockey team plays. And this is in a public concourse label on the bar right across from actually our Nova Scotia Hall of Fame. Here we see dark liquor turning into two naked female bodies with the tagline, "Plunder the night." Plunder by definition, take by force. So in 2011 is where my story starts. I'm aware of the time, and let me move quickly and certainly open to questions. My name's Dan. In 2011, me and my colleagues in public health and addictions, waiting for the slide to advance. Here we go. This was a flyer in 2011 for our family Christmas tree lighting that was going to take place in our downtown core. This went home in the backpack of every elementary age school child in the Halifax Regional Municipality, and we see that the Olin's Brewery, it was a premier sponsor. So this Olin's Brewery label or brand or ad went home with elementary school students. That sort of piqued our interest in the role alcohol sponsorship advertising has in our city. We hosted the Canada Winter Games in our city long about 2010, 2011, and a large oval skating rink was built on our commons area, and there was a movement to make the oval permanent. It was supposed to be temporary, and they decided to make it permanent, and so they put the oval up for sale for naming rights, and Molson Coors made a pitch to name the oval. Given it was going to be our largest playground, a number of people came together to ask the community, do you want your largest playground named after an alcohol manufacturer? And that was as well in 2011. So the Olin's ad going home in the backpack sort of piqued our interest, and now this large playground perhaps being named by the alcohol industry with some advertising piqued our interest as well. So that's when we first engaged the media. We encouraged our NGO partners to develop some key messages regarding the science between alcohol advertising and early consumption, relying heavily on the work of Dr. David Jernigan and Dr. Samantha Cuquier, Johns Hopkins University Alcohol Advertising Research Center. And we generated quite a bit of media, traditional media, evening newscasts, newspaper articles at that time. Ultimately, because of the dominant nature of the culture, our city council did choose not to name the oval after the alcohol industry, but to name an adjacent festival area, to call it the Molson Coors Square next to the oval. And at the time when they voted, one of our, I believe she was our deputy mayor at the time, but she said, Councillor Linda Mosier, our Natal Day, which is our summer festival, is called the Alexander Keith Natal Day. Our tree lighting is the Olin's tree lighting, and the biggest sporting team that Halifax has is the Halifax Mooseheads, essentially saying, why wouldn't we name something after the alcohol industry and permit them to advertise? So again, that work in 2011 was really trying to create some community discourse and trying to interrupt the belief that all money is good money and that sponsorship is not advertising, when the science tells us obviously it is. If you'd like to read more about that, the local NGO, Injury Free Nova Scotia, has a supplement on their website, Lessons from the Oval, the fight to stop alcohol advertising at the Halifax Oval, a fight that we lost, however, much learning took place. That was through the year 2011. Moving quickly now, just looking at the time, 2012 we had a municipal election. We decided to get a bit more active. On my Twitter account, I was keeping an eye on who was going to host the Christmas tree lighting, and they were going to have the television characters, the Backyardigans, there. So I tweeted out through social media, community, what do you think about beer and Backyardigans, given that Olin's was going to host and sponsor and advertise at our family Christmas tree lighting with the Backyardigans jumping on stage, obviously targeting, the Backyardigans obviously targeting young people. My Twitter feed had been followed by a number of the local press, and they picked up the story, and with the help and support of the local health district, both public health and addiction services, and some fine NGOs like Injury Free Nova Scotia, who were the wind beneath my wings, I took some media opportunities to engage the public in the science of advertising and young people using alcohol. We made very few declarative statements. We really arrived in the media asking questions and wanting to know what the community's perspective was. Well, lo and behold, the amount of media was not comfortable for Olin's Brewery, and Olin stepped forward to say, at that time, which would have been November 2012, we're going to withdraw from sponsoring all city events until the city comes up with a clear and concise policy of when we can engage and when we can't. So surprisingly, we had common ground with the alcohol industry at that point because we were asking for the exact same thing. Let's set the rules and guidelines of when the alcohol industry can show up with their sponsorship advertising and when they can. And this led, I want to say there's many more vectors than just this, but this social media presence helped lead to Halifax's first ever municipal alcohol policy. And that came in 2013, soon after 2012, mostly because the beer companies in town had said, we're not going to arrive back until there's a playing field here, or until we have some guidelines. So on October of 2013, the Halifax Regional Municipal Council approved Administrative Order Number 15, HRM's Municipal Alcohol Policy. You can read it there. Did we get on the health side everything, and on the injury side we'd be looking for? Absolutely not. The HRM policy is a little bit of weak sauce. However, we had some very brave councillors and city staff step forward even to create a first policy. Two big wins in there is we removed the message from all city advertising to drink responsibly, which is an industry message, and the message now on all city-sponsored events has to be, please follow the low-risk drinking guidelines, and the low-risk drinking guidelines are shown to decrease consumption, and when we decrease consumption, a good scientific hypothesis is we would decrease rates of unintended injury. The other thing that we thought was very positive is the removal of large inflatables from family city events. So the large beer can inflatable or the large beer bottle inflatable are no longer permitted. We did go for the removal of alcohol advertising from our city transit system, and that's in public consultation now. It's been 3 years of public consultation, so I think the role of public consultation is an interesting one. And we also suggested, they had some language in there about people who rent city space to offer events should do this and should do that, and we wanted the language to say will do this and will do that, but the city still is consulting on that 36 months later. So a quick story, I hope people learn from it. My lessons learned is have a plan. We didn't arrive to the social media or to the media just ad hoc or willy-nilly. We did have a plan that we were going to target the Christmas tree lighting to see if there was opportunity to engage the community in a what if and what could be. When you're on social media, there's no rules. So you have to make your way through the noise and ignore the trolls. I was called a temperance prohibitionist with no friends. I was called boring. I was told to mind my own business. I was called no fun. People started to go on my wife's Facebook page and ask questions about what my motives were. I really encourage people to be in social media because that's where the public is. You have to be brave. And what we've really learned, and my biggest learning, is be many, not just one. Because if there's one person carrying the banner, they get labeled so much with that banner that it makes things difficult. So my individual Twitter account has now morphed into a community Twitter account called HRM Alcohol. I encourage everyone to follow it. On Twitter, you would just have to Twitter search Alcohol Action HRM, and there's a group of about 30 people that are behind that Twitter feed now. So the one turned into the many, and that diffuses a lot of situations. When I engage with Twitter, we have a few basic rules. One, we always tweet from reliable and valid sources. We never argue, and we end most of our tweets with a question mark asking the community their thoughts on something. So a wide-ranging sharing. I hope that people got something from that here on a cold, blustery afternoon. So my name's Dan. Thank you very much, everyone.
That was fantastic. Thank you very much, Dan. It's I think it was good to hear two kind of opposing policies. So obviously the concussion policy going one way, and then alcohol policy in Nova Scotia, specifically Halifax, coming in another with the use of social media. So that's the end of definitely the formal part of the presentation today. No questions have rolled in throughout the presentation. I see some people are starting to exit, so we'll give everybody just a couple seconds here just in case they have anything really burning that they want addressed. Hopefully everybody out there is not turning down cake, but it's good that you are. Okay, so people starting off there. We have one question that just came in, and this is for Dan. Have you had pushback from local groups about having to turn down alcohol funding when funding is hard to get? So I assume for events and stuff like that?
Yes, there's lots of questions about the lack of resources and how can we say no? Saying no to resources in the community, agreed, is tremendously challenging. And I should be clear, we're not telling people to say no. We are asking people, can we help you come up with a policy of gift acceptance and of taking money that is ethical and appropriate and is not ad hoc, if you see what I'm saying. And we'd like to help with that. But yes, it is difficult to turn down money in these tough times.
Absolutely. Yeah, and certainly not going down that naming and shaming, finger-wagging route is definitely a great way to go, so that's awesome. With no other questions, I think we're going to wrap up. Again, if you want to get in touch with Dan or I, feel free to shoot me an email. The session will be coming out shortly, and the recording of the session will be available soon. So thank you all very much for your time. I hope you found it informative and interesting, and we hope you'll join the next pair of presents. Thank you all very much.